Welcome everyone to KFAS podcast. This is Hالة الجسار. The Ultimate Prize for African Development is a prestigious annual award established in 2014 by the government of Kuwait in honor of Dr. الرحمن السميط, who is a physician and a humanitarian who dedicated his life to improving the lives of people across Africa. Today, it is an honor to welcome our distinguished guest, Dr. Kathrin. Dr. Kathrin is a winner of the Sumit Prize in 2023 and is an associate professor in the Department of Geographical Sciences at the University of Maryland. She is also the director of African program for NASA, Harvest, and she is an expert in satellite remote sensing and artificial intelligence. Dr. Kathrin, thank you so much for joining us today. And we are pleased if you can tell us more about yourself and, just let us know about your career, please.
Thank you so much. It is a wonderful honor for me to be here today and to specifically being in the KFAS building is quite phenomenal. I never imagined that I'd ever be here today. So it's a wonderful honor and a privilege to have been selected for the Asmite Prize it was selected in 2022, but I received it in 2023. And just a little bit about myself. So I grew up in Kampala in Uganda, which is where I was born, and I did my undergraduate in environmental science at Makerere University. I was one of the first environmental science students. This program was new. And then went on to do my master's in geography and environmental engineering at the Johns Hopkins University, and then my PhD in geographical sciences. Okay. So my main focus of my work is utilizing satellites and machine learning and trying to create data sets, products to understand agriculture with a focus on smallholder agriculture across Africa, and do a lot of capacity building and work related with methods to utilize the data as well as to use them in practice for monitoring.
So, Dr. Kathrin, what do you think about working with KFAS and Kuwaiti partners for African philanthropy, please? Yeah,
I think there's a very broad space in terms of learning and exchange, as well as there's so many fundamental questions that can be asked and researched. And there's a huge need for collaborating with not only stakeholders in development, but as well as with institutions that require or have to build the capacity, for example, to do research. So there is a very broad space there. And I see KFAS as one of those organizations that could be a very strong partner, for example, for the African Academy of Sciences, inspiring and supporting researchers to, learn and build methods that are applicable to their, specific country context, but more so in terms of exchange and learning. So from students from Kuwait, students from African countries can not only collaborate on research projects, but can come up with very unique solutions and research questions that wouldn't otherwise be inspired without that collaboration. So I see a lot of potential in terms of exchanging of ideas and information, and being here with you already, the exchange we've already had has already sparked so many interesting things that we could look into that we wouldn't otherwise have thought about without having this opportunity to meet in person. So there is a very grand space to be able to collaborate and learn from each other.
This is interesting. Another question, many people ask, how we can relate satellite remote sensing with crop mapping, with food security and artificial intelligence or AI.
So this is a really good question, one that I like to answer a lot, I guess you can tell. But in terms of agriculture specifically, in order to understand how much food will be available on the market, you have to understand production. So to understand production, you need to know where crops are planted. And so, and what crops they are and what condition they're in. And you can do this many different ways. You can go to the field and measure, crop height. You can do crop cuts and try to estimate yield in a specific plot. But it's not scalable, because if you're trying to understand, be it regional or national level food security, you need to be able to do it in many different places. So one dimension where satellites are really beneficial is trying to be able to do this at scale. So we have thousands of satellites taking pictures of our Earth. And from those satellites, we're able to create products like cropland maps, crop type maps. So what crops are growing where, and then also utilize them to be able to predict the outcome. So understanding how well crops are doing and what the yield will be from particular regions. Another dimension to this is from satellite data. So there is what we call optical data, from which it's like taking a picture with your everyday camera. But then the other is looking at rainfall, temperature, soil moisture, things we can't actually see with our eyes, but we're able to sense from space over really, really large areas. And so when you combine these, we can better understand how a crop field is evolving during the growing season. And so the other advantage is that the satellites take pictures every day, which is you can't go to every single field in your country every day. So they allow us that advantage. And then the other side of it is being able to compare the current season with all the seasons. So if there was a drought in, let's say, 2015, you can compare 2024 with 2015. And that anomaly will give you an indication of how bad things could be compared to a previous season. Another dimension is being able to track large-scale extreme events, so drought and flooding, and how those impact on crop health. So if there was a massive flood that affected 25,000 hectares of, let's say, 30,000 hectares of typical cropland area, you would know that there will be, a significant reduction on the outcome for the season. The other things satellites allow us to do, we can combine them with survey data, with a lot of other indicators on population, on infrastructure, which when you combine these things, we're able to understand how a particular community might be able to thrive if there was an extreme event which might impact on food availability. So there's so many different things that we can do. And how artificial intelligence and machine learning come in is the fact that when a satellite takes a picture of, let's say, Kuwait City, as an example, or a daily image from MODIS, which covers the whole world, when we stitch them together, we have we have billions of pixels. So pixels is the smallest discernible point on the ground. And what it means in this case, that in order to analyze and get insights from this massive image that covers a really large area, we have to use machine learning. So you train a model to understand that this is water, and then the model looks for water everywhere in the pixel. And so with recent advances, we're able to do much more complex analyses. So combining multiple data sets. So you can look at rainfall, temperature, soil moisture, vegetation condition, vegetation height, and be able to get a synthesis of what is actually happening in an area, rather than looking at those different things individually. So AI is allowing us to be able to do that at a much faster scale, but also in a way that we get much better insights. I think another thing to add, however, is that sometimes when we talk about satellite remote sensing and agriculture, there's a perception that, we've solved everything, we can see everything, and we can understand everything everywhere. This is not true, because we always need ground data. We need to actually get the data that we would use to train models to understand what is actually happening on the ground, in addition to validating, which is checking whether what we're measuring is correct. And so through my work, I work extensively, not only with students at universities, but I work with extension agents in ministries of agriculture. And we need to be able to collect a lot of data from a lot of places in order to build the models that allow us to be able to predict. So another dimension is trying to predict what the seasonal outcome will be as early as possible. And historical satellite data allow us to be able to do that.
Yeah, this is right. I definitely agree with you. Now with the environmental changes and global climate change over the globe, why there's a question always come to our mind, why food security is very important.
So this is fundamental. So I always think about some basic things. If you are hungry, you can't think, right? Some people can't actually think at all when they're hungry. And if you are hungry, it means that fundamentally even your health is compromised, right? So let's say you were sick, but were hungry and you need medication. If you took medication when you're hungry, the medication might not take you so far, right? So I always think about food as being fundamental. So if we're going to, let's say, address healthcare, you have to address food security. If you were to address education, if you provide schools but no food, kids who go to school hungry, the outcome is not the same as if, they were not worried about where the next meal will come from. So food security fundamentally is knowing that you will be able to eat, that you know where your next meal will come from, that you're not worried about where your next meal will come from, and that the food is nutritious and safe. And it is a very complex topic because not only does it involve environmental monitoring, water, vegetation, soil moisture, it goes to also monitoring things like infrastructure, roads, bridges, also can affect food security. If the bridge or the road that leads to a certain community that receives food from another community is cut off, then they wouldn't have access to food. Another side of it is that it is a very broad topic. So one country might be dependent on another to import its food. And so you need to pay attention to what's happening in that country. If there's a drought in the region where you import your food from, there might be a ban on export. And what does that translate into? A spike in food prices in your region. And so it is so complex that we really need to look at it. And it's so fundamental. While, for a lot of people, the minority in this case actually don't worry about where the food comes from. Their food will come from because they might have the income to be able to go purchase it at the supermarket. A huge population in the world depends on what's growing in their field. And so because this is fundamental, it is absolutely important that not only we're able to track and predict what might happen in an area, we also need to be able to build policies that can actually help when we know that something is wrong. So if I predict that there will be a drought, or if I predict or estimate that this flood resulted in 70% crop damage, and that's it, that doesn't solve the problem. And that's where the partnership, for example, that you'd mentioned in your previous question is about. Somebody needs to use this intelligence, this information, to implement something that will help the community that's affected. It could be to bring food. It could be to invest in better inputs, fertilizer or seed. It could be to bring, put in infrastructure like roads and bridges that would allow for food to arrive at a reasonable cost. So it's very complicated, and it's all hands on deck, basically.
Agree.
Yeah,
I agree, definitely. It's a complex, and the whole Earth system is a complex system. And resolving these problems, there are many challenges. So the other question that will get me to the next question, what are the challenges that you faced in resolving just give us like some examples resolving some of these problems on Earth using AI, artificial intelligence, of course, and with the satellite remote sensing. Yes.
I wouldn't say they're resolved.
Well, we try.
What problems, I guess, exist and we're sort of working on, and what are some of the challenges? There are many challenges, I would say, fundamentally from a data standpoint. So a lot of existing satellites were built for specific purposes. So You hear a lot about using Landsat, which is 30-meter resolution, or Sentinel-1, Sentinel-2, 10, 20-meter resolution. These resolutions, Landsat is great for the size of agriculture they have in the US. Sentinel-1, Sentinel-2 is perfect for the kind of agriculture they have in Europe. However, 10-meter resolution pixels, if you're looking at agriculture in Rwanda, is not sufficient because the fields are so much smaller and they're very, very complex. In addition to a lot of, in East and Southern Africa, there's a lot of intercropping and mixed cropping. So we can't separate the signatures of the same crops in multiple crops in one pixel, for example. Another fundamental thing is the fact that the prerequisite data for us to train models is largely non-existent. And so if you think about the new explosion in AI, if you think about large language models, the reason why it's rapidly evolved is because the data that are required to train the models exist. We're talking about text that's already digitized from books, from manuscript, from everything people post on the internet. This does not exist for agriculture. Somebody needs to go to a field and map a crop, that this is a maize field, and then you can build a model on top of that. But, more recent work there's a lot of promise in trying to create generative models for Earth system studies, so ones that could be applied in different contexts. But fundamentally, we're still dealing with very small fields that are very complex. We're dealing with a lot of cloud cover. If you're thinking about, let's say, Rwanda, which is in the hills, where it's the middle of the tropics, it's always raining. So optical data are very limited. And the growing seasons evolve really quickly. So Rwanda has 3 seasons, for example. There are lots of things that you kind of have to work on to try to get the data to fit the problem, because the data have not been designed for the problem. But at the same time, the last couple of years, there's been a lot of commercial companies providing high resolution data, and there is some promise there, but also requires a lot of work. And going back to the point around why it's important for people who are looking at the problem from a personal perspective. So an agriculture student in Rwanda would be very interested in making a model that works really well for Rwanda. And so to the level that somebody from another place wouldn't be. And so it's absolutely important that they have the capacity to be able to use, to be able to develop, to be able to explore the same data sets that others have access to. And that's the other big, you can call it an obstacle, a limitation, but it's something that has to be addressed because, the saying goes, the people who are closest to the problem are able, usually have the best solution to it. So if a student is able to go to the field and collect all the data they want and come back and try to work out a model, they probably will build the best possible one for their region or their country, which could translate into a problem, solving a problem similar to my experience in my PhD, where I was keenly interested in understanding drought and agricultural land use, and in the process ended up being involved in a project that had impact on a community. So. Those types of things have to be scaled access for people to be able to work with these tools. Yes.
Yeah. Worldwide, you've received many awards and prizes. And when you received the Sumit prize, can you explain for us your experience, your feeling when you got the call?
I don't know how to describe it because it was unreal it's very, very unreal. But to give you the context, I was at Wageningen University. They have this agricultural research site, and literally we were looking at a field-based remote sensing. It's like a big robot with cameras under it, and we were standing in this hangar, and I got a call, and I was just. My reaction was like, I was, smiling ear to ear. Right. And nobody really understood. And I didn't understand what it really
Yes.
meant, and in the sense that it was as if it was not real. And I think the first thing I did was to text my sister. I think I called her probably, and she was like, she always screams when I tell her this type of news.
Yeah, this is expected.
Yeah, but this for
Really,
me was it was absolutely. I don't know how to describe it. It's like it was absolutely the thing that you need maybe to remind you as to why it is important what you're doing, and that it has meaning, and that it could lead to much broader impact. And I usually say that it's like the gift that keeps giving, because not only have I met and connected with so many different people after the prize, but just this opportunity to be here and exchange with you and experience the meaning of collaboration and generosity, actually, which is, that everything that I've received from KFAS since the first day that I learned has been amazing. So still ear to ear, it was absolutely amazing.
There is a question which maybe every, especially for young people, ask, how did you choose your career? Or did you choose it from your early life since you are like a child? Or you went through this like by loving science, then you decide that you want to go and study satellite remote sensing and geography? Yes.
Sometimes I wish that was true, but it isn't. And I think I can kind of tell you it's a lot of chance and preparation. My analogy about, prepare when the door opens, you're ready to kind of walk through it. But so when I finished my undergraduate in environmental science, actually, I can backtrack a little bit. For most of my high school, I played badminton. So
Right.
they used to call me Kathy Badminton in high school. And so when I finished my high school, I wanted to do sports science for my my undergraduate. And I thought I'd do like physiology and exercise nutrition type work. I was really interested in, human well-being in this sense from a physical perspective. Because of badminton, me and my sisters, we all played badminton. We did really, really well. And however, when I finished my high school, I didn't do well enough to get into the sports science program. So well enough in the sense, in Uganda, we have a points system. And so based on the subject you choose, the points either will get you into a program, which will be funded by the government, or you have to pay for private, at the university. But my family, there's no way we could have afforded for me to go to university, us paying with private funds. And so I learned that year from one of my sister's friends that the university sometimes has new programs that are not advertised initially. And so the environmental science program was actually one of those programs. And I applied to it and I got in, surprisingly. And so I started my environmental science program. One thing I guess I could say is that in high school, my favorite subjects were math and geography. And so that was the combination that I chose, one that would let me do both math and geography. And when I got into the environmental science program, it was one that kind of brings these two subjects together. And I went on to, the first time I went on to do field work, I did some mapping in Mount Elgon. And I thought that I was actually going to do, so when I applied to a master's program, I wanted to do something around environmental science and technology, and then maybe forestry, because I'd done some mapping in the field with the Uganda Wildlife Authority. Yeah. Fast forward, when I went to Johns Hopkins to do my master's, it was environment engineering, and we had a very strong focus on climate. I had a little bit of climate work, but then also on math foundations for decision making. But when I applied to the program, I wanted to do something, and I wrote this in my personal statement, that would allow me to apply my knowledge and skills back home. Mm-hmm. However, the environment engineering program didn't allow me to do that. So it was like a lot of learning, but then I didn't get the opportunity to work on a problem that I could apply back home. Mm-hmm. And when I was at Hopkins, I explored, I did a course on disease and development. I did one on teaching. I took all these extra things because there were things that would bring me closer to working back home. That was sort of like my initial intention. Yeah. Yeah. And then I applied to the PhD at the University of Maryland. Mm. I wrote the same statement. It says that I'm hoping that I will gain knowledge and I will apply it back home. And when I started the program, my first meeting, when we meet the faculty in the department, I went and talked to who was the chair at the time, and he asked me, tell me about yourself. I was like, well, I'm Kathrin. I just finished my master's. And I have an undergraduate in environmental science. I'm from Uganda, and I'm here to learn all the remote sensing and GIS, and I want to apply it to, back home. And so he says to meet him, in his office, and I go to meet him. I think it must have been like maybe 2 or so weeks or a week later. And when I walked in, he was like, okay, so. Yeah, tell me about yourself again. So I kind of do the same thing. And then he says, how would you like to go do field work in Uganda? Like my first conversation was like, what? Because my PhD advisor, Dr. Christopher Justice, actually was a co-chair of what's called GeoGLAM, which is the Group on Earth Observation's Global Agriculture Monitoring Initiative. And his co-chair was from Uganda's Office of the Prime Minister. And he introduced me to the Office of the Prime Minister, and I started to explore food security because the office there focuses. They do a lot of the focus of their program is around supporting the Karamoja region, and so I started to read about Karamoja. I started to read about land use. I started to read about food security. So the idea of I didn't have any prior knowledge of food security until that point when I started delving into that problem. Right. And I spent years not only going to Karamoja and doing field work and being present and understanding how agriculture works there, what droughts mean and how land use is changing and how policies are being implemented. And fast forward, I guess you'd say everything is history then. I was looking at agriculture remote sensing as my primary focus area. And I went on to, when I finished my PhD, actually, or right before I finished my PhD, the Office of the Prime Minister in Uganda was implementing a disaster risk financing program. And I'd done some field work, had come back from the field, I'd presented my results to the office, and then the head of the department asked me to go and present my results to the Prime Minister and his steering committee. There was a drought going on, and then a decision was made to provide food aid the next 2 days after that presentation. Yes. And then I was invited to support the development of that program, in the sense that I did my research that I was doing actually ended up informing the development of that program, where they would determine when and how bad the drought would be and where they would disperse funds. And so that was the focus of the later part of my PhD. And then in the process, I started working on building capacity. We had some funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where I was working in Tanzania, working with the National Food Security Division. And that's the first, in Tanzania, I would say is the first place where I learned how to really work with government departments and understand the flow of information for agriculture and figure out how technology like electronic data collection forms and doing crop conditions assessment using remote sensing, all of that I learned while I was supporting this project in Tanzania. And then I learned from that, I started to apply the things that work in one country that could be modified to fit another country's specific flow of information. So I then implemented something similar from the Tanzania crop monitor to the Uganda crop monitor, the Rwanda crop monitor, Ethiopia crop monitor, Then in Senegal right now, I have a project with Nastasivier, which is a capacity building program on using machine learning to create cropland and crop type maps. So it's sort of like, it's sort of, so almost like it's building on, going back to preparation and then learning, because a lot of the things that I'm doing now, I didn't do 3 years ago, or they did not exist 3 years ago or 4 years ago. Yes. So it's about exploration and learning. And I think that's sort of what my journey is. Last thing I would say is that I'm the combination, I think, of my parents. Mm-hmm. My dad is a tinkerer, people like to figure out how to make things work. Yes. So I'm like that. And then my mom is a perseverance, very strong-minded and continuing, I don't know how to describe it, very creative, where like, if this doesn't work, you can try it a different way, but you keep working on the problem. And so how I work and solve problems is a combination of the two of them and what they bring, with how they raise me, because my dad's tinkering, he could fix one cup for like a whole week, and they would be taking it completely apart and cleaning it completely and then putting it back together. And that requires patience. Of course. It requires determination. And I think a whole other mindset, which, in the world we live in with technology and the internet and social media, it's very difficult to focus on one problem. But I think this is really, really important.
Yeah, which are the ingredient for research.
Yes, absolutely.
And, being determined to solve problems. Absolutely. So the capacity building, which you worked with Uganda and other countries in Africa, did you include training students and training researchers as well? And that capacity building?
From country to country, it varies. So in Tanzania, when we're working with the National Food Security Division, we actually were collaborating with Sokoine University of Agriculture. Mm-hmm. And there's sort of my long-standing collaborators where we have, at the time we're exploring using drones and the data collection tools that I mentioned. I learned how to build these forms while we were working in Tanzania. I worked with a student there who also learned how to do it, and he actually turned it into a business where he can help people, to convert their surveys into electronic surveys. But fast forward today, there's a project I have on using GoPro cameras for collecting data, and then we use a computer vision pipeline for getting from the photographs to crop type data. This is something we've tested in Tanzania with my collaborators at Sokoine University. I collaborate with Makerere University. We've done a lot of experimenting around the data collection, but we do have a lot of back and forth research with there's a faculty in computer science, as well as in the Department of things called geomatics at Makerere. Mm-hmm. In Kenya, I've worked with researchers at IRRI, for example, which is a international livestock research center. I also work with agriculture research organizations. So Cairo, we worked with them a little bit in 2019 while we're supporting the Ministry of Agriculture in Kenya. It kind of goes on and on. I have a collaboration with students at Carnegie Mellon in Rwanda, at the Rwanda campus. Yes. We are doing a couple of machine learning based projects. I have a collaboration with somebody in South Africa. But what is, I think, why it's become even more and more important is the fact that because the methods evolve so quickly, so from collaborating with ministries of agriculture to space agencies, usually the missing ingredient is local talent, local researchers or students who have the skills, who have spongy brains, who are willing to work on problems. And so we're kind of trying to make this linkage where we always have somebody who can work on a problem. And more recently, I guess we could blame it on the Ultimate Prize. There are lots and lots of students who are reaching out to collaborate, including from Brazil, Peru, from Bangladesh, from everywhere who really, usually the emails is like they're inspired by what I do and they would like to do something similar for where they're from, but also try to figure out obviously other things that they can do with it. But I think capacity building comes in there. Sometimes you can call them like 4 buckets or 3 buckets, where there is the methods. Once the methods exist, we have the capacity to do something. There is the technology, which is the capacity to be able to acquire the tools, the resources, so compute, internet. And then there is human capacity, which is that absolute critical. You can have all the computers in the world. Without human capacity, it doesn't work. And in the human capacity component, we have ministries of agriculture, departments of relief. They have to have staff that can work with monitoring and mapping. Right. There are extension agents who actually work with farmers. That's another dimension. And then there's university students who are able to utilize new methods as they become available. So it's all of these things are important, and they have to there has to be a balance, because supporting the Ministry of Agriculture in Kenya is much smoother, or working with the Kenya Ministry of Agriculture is much smoother when you have a local research collaborator who can help them work through some of the data sets. So it's all intertwined, basically. Yeah.
Right. Okay. The last question. Any words from you to inspire the other researchers in the same field or in other fields, please?
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
So backtracking on my story of, who I am, where I come from, I think we would say it's a 360 revolution in the case, because my dad is a car mechanic. My mom owns a restaurant, but they believed and made sure they sacrificed everything for me to go to school. And it's surreal also that the 2023 prize went to an organization that's trying to encourage and support girls going to school. So for me, it was like, yes. Another big yes. Yeah. But to say that, if you believe, one is to work hard and keep working and keep adding skills. So learn new things and not be afraid of new things. So if I didn't try new things, I would never have done remote sensing, because in our program, our department received computers maybe in my second year. And it's when I really started working with GIS in my undergrad. And so, but it never intimidated me. I wanted to learn. I wanted to figure it out. And I think, to this day, I'm constantly trying to figure out new problems, new solutions. That the field we're in evolves so quickly, so rapidly, and you have to keep up. So remember to invest in yourself, to learn, to aspire, to try new things, not be afraid. But also that if you believe in something and you work really hard, a time will come when it all makes sense. I usually say to my students that you can't go back and prepare when the opportunity knocks. So you have to be prepared. So when the door is in front of you, you are prepared to walk in and show what you have learned. So it is important to prepare and be prepared for the moments as they come. And I think the best that I've understood, I feel like I'm a perpetual learner and will always want to go to school, is that open your mind and learn about learning. And I think that's what's needed for sure. And if you apply this in every dimension, be it with how you relate with your family, with your friends, with the world, and understanding how things work, I think it's absolutely the best.
Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Kathrin. This is really an inspiring podcast. And thank you for being here in Kuwait, and wishing you all the best.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me.
Thank you.